In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there are only ads. Oh, also, it is said that the great way is not difficult, just avoid picking and choosing. But you know what? Today I'm going to be doing a lot of choosing. You can't stop me. You can't stop me from choosing. I'm actually just making a little tier list here of all the Primarchs of more than 40k and technically 30k because several of them don't last into 40k. But that's fine. It's fine. I am rating them entirely based on how I like them as characters. Uh, I will say that I have kind of a love-hate. Gosh dang it! I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Warhammer these days. There's a lot of stuff in it I find very cool, but there's also a lot of stuff in it that I'm like finding fairly objectionable and things like that. Or at the very least, I don't always like the grimdark tone. I'm gonna actually just make a video about how I feel about 40k, just because I like talking about meat. But anyway, I'm just gonna rate these Primarchs, and these are based on like my own personal opinion and like how much I like them, how much I don't like them, etc., etc. And some of them, they're kind of flexible depending on what book you're reading them from. For instance, like sometimes if you're reading them from a certain book, the Primarch will be way cooler, and then other times it's like, wow, this is kind of a trash character. But it really depends on the book. Kind of like the Emperor, where sometimes the Emperor seems like he should be an interesting character, and then for some reason they always make him just not. Or there's always like another book that makes him seem very dumb. And I'm going to start with the low tier on the list because that's easy, and then I'm going to kind of just go all over. I was looking at other tier lists, and I already realized that several of my picks are apparently very unpopular, so we're going to see how that goes. Anyway, the first one that we're going to rate is Kurz. Conrad Kurz goes into F tier, and Conrad Kurz goes into F tier because I just really don't like him. I don't like the torture stuff. I don't like the darkness. I don't like the weird edginess of him. He's just not very interesting to me on top of everything else. He's just kind of, you know, bad. Like I don't know. There's just nothing to really like about Conrad Curse. And unlike some of the other Primarchs who are bad, but they have like redeeming qualities, or you at least understand why they're bad, Conrad Curse is just like a bad one from the get-go. And the Emperor giving him a legion seems like maybe one of the dumbest things he did. But yeah, we're gonna go with Kurz because I actually have a strong opinion that he's bad. Now that's not to say that the Night Lords themselves are always bad. I think they're kind of horrible in the Horus Heresy, but if you ever read like the Night Lords novels that take place in like the 40k, like that, like the Night Lords omnibus, I think they're actually very interesting characters, and they do a very good job of just being interesting to read about. So I like them there. I don't really like them or Kurz here. So that's where he's gonna go. Then we're gonna go for another pick that I know is a little unpopular is Magnus. And Magnus is kind of cool just because of all of his magical powers and stuff like that. Oh, Magnus is kind of cool. I put him in D, but I meant to put him in E. Because I like the magic and stuff like that. And I like the idea of like searching for knowledge and things like that. But he's just like a fail son. And honestly, I just really don't like Magnus. Like, if you ever read like the Burning of Prospero and stuff like that, the fact that he's just kind of like sitting there letting his world burn and doesn't even like do anything about it until the very last second, and then he gets his spine broken, and he's just so arrogant, and he clearly doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Like 9 times out of 10, he's just a nitwit. But the thing that's annoying about that is that he's written, and you're supposed to think he's really smart and has all this esoteric knowledge, but he legitimately just seems like a nitwit. I I think that is more of a problem with writing than anything else, but as a character, I just find him not very good or interesting, and I feel like any interesting aspect of him is severely weighed down by how much of a nitwit he is. And when if you say Magnus did nothing wrong, it's like Magnus was making constant mistakes. You might say, well, you can make a mistake without technically being wrong in the sense of like doing the wrong thing, but then he just straight up does a bunch of wrong things. And his leadership was destroying the Thousand Suns, and I'm just really not very big on Magnus. Honestly, I'm fairly tempted to put him into F tier. Actually, you know what? We're gonna put him in an F tier because I just really don't like him. Isaac Araman, and there are several Thousand Sun characters that I really like. I like the protagonist of the Black Legion novels. He's really interesting. I think he's cool. I think Isaac Araman is pretty interesting, and his spiral downwards towards corruption is much more interesting to me than Magnus's, where just Magnus is just like completely and totally full of himself, screws up constantly, and then this is what you get. That's it. And, and there are several novels where I do actually kind of like Magnus, like novels where he's adjacent to Lorgar. I think are kind of interesting, just because they have kind of a unique bond. But I don't know, like I said, some of these guys are a little bit flexible, and I kind of go back and forth between E and F. Because there he would be E in a couple of novels where he's at least interesting adjacent to Lorgar. However, if I'm going to rate his overall character, I'm going to keep him in F, I think. Yeah. All right. Let's go for one that I like a little bit more. We're going to go for Russ. Russ is, I'm pretty sure, yeah, solid B tier. He is actually one of the main characters in a couple of my favorite novels. He's not. I'm not really big on his Legion. I don't really like the whole wolf, 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 wolf. I don't really care for that. But I think that Russ has some pretty interesting stuff, and there's a couple of novels where he's pretty cool, and I like the idea that Russ has this rugged exterior, but if you get past it, you see that he's actually maybe a little bit more sensitive than you might have thought he was, and he's maybe a little bit more worried about his brothers than he wants to let on, stuff like that. I think he's pretty neat in that sense. Um, I'm really not big on the whole space Viking thing. I think it could be interesting, but I don't know. I just don't think that the Space Wolves are a particularly interesting group in that regard. So he's B tier, no, a little bit higher. Now let's see. Mortarion. Mortarion's E tier. Mortarion, I feel like could be interesting, but he just kind of never is to me. He's just I don't care about what happens to him really. I read novels involving Mortarion, and I'm just like I'm not very impressed with him as a character. And by the way, none of these are like power rankings because I don't really care about their power rankings as individual. I just don't think that's that interesting. If if all they are is a good fighter, cool, whatever. I don't really care. But anyway, yeah, Mortarion is interesting, and I guess there's kind of the thing in the sense that he ends up embracing demonology a little bit and stuff like that, even though he really doesn't want to, etc. He doesn't want to be touched by the warp, blah blah blah, all this silly stuff. Um, I guess not being wanted to be touched by the warp is not silly, but the way he acts in those regards is pretty silly. And he's just kind of a failure in the sense that you kind of get the impression that he wants to be more than he is, but he just has so few redeeming qualities, and then he kind of loses his legion more or less to Typhus, who, you know, I think is ultimately a way more interesting character than Mortarion is. And I don't know, just something about like the way if you've ever I don't remember what book it is that he actually gives himself over to Nurgle. If you ever like read like the story that leads up to it, I don't know, I just find him kind of eh. He's also against one of my favorite Primarchs, specifically in several of those books, and I think minor spoilers. Well, actually, maybe major spoilers. I don't know. Apparently, in one of the books, he beats up my favorite Primarch or one of my favorite Primarchs. I don't know. I didn't read it because when I tried to get the audiobook version, there was some kind of racist Asian accents that kept coming up, and it made it legitimately really hard to listen. So yeah, but he's gonna be in the E tier. Um, Lionel Johnson is gonna be D, a little bit above him. Lionel Johnson is a D because I like his aesthetics. I like the aesthetics of his Legion, the whole knight thing. I like the idea of him going out into the wilderness, fighting these great beasts, and that he's not really going to give into chaos or anything like that. However, he's a dumb guy. He seems like he doesn't have any interpersonal skills, like, at all, which, I mean, you would think if you were, like, that much of a super genius, you would at least be able to be, like, have some leadership quality, and everything I've read makes it seem like he's just a jerk, just an absolute dick, and you don't want to follow him. And I don't care that he's a great swordsman. I just don't care about that. There's the whole thing with him and Kurz during the Unremembered Empire, and he's like trying to kill Kurz and blah 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 blah. I just don't care. He's boring on the surface. He has a cool aesthetic, but he's boring on the surface. Then I read about his interactions with people, and I'm like, does this man literally have no interpersonal skills? Just none? There's just nothing inspiring about him. There's nothing that interesting about him. He just has an aesthetic that's kind of cool. He barely seems to have a personality, if I'm honest. Like, so I don't know. I get the impression that he kind of wants to do the right thing, but he's also all secretive and weird, and I just don't care for it. Interestingly enough, the Dark Angels, reading about them as a legion, they're actually one of my favorite legions in the Horus Heresy. I like their aesthetic. I like the storylines they have. I like all this stuff about loyalty and, like, like Luther, like what's going on there. Like, why is Luther doing what he does? I think he's actually one of the more interesting characters in 40K. I think Lionel Johnson is kind of a detriment to his legion more than anything else. And another character is Ferris. I'm going to put Ferris into E. Because Ferris, I don't hate. I don't hate him like I really and truly kind of... Well, even hate's a strong word because they're fictional characters. But I don't dislike him in the same way I like to dislike Kurz or Magnus. I just find him the most generic and the most boring. He has a line... And I wish I remember where this was from. I remember I saw it in like a Primarchs quote video. And I can't remember where it got traced back to. But he says something like, make war and again until nothing remains which can stand against us. All else is sophistry and pretty lies. That is just like everything I hate about 40K in a line. Just the shallowness. The meaninglessness of it, the nihilism of it. I don't care, man. This is your existence? Well, if this is your existence, could you at least be interesting? No, he's a boring character. He's a boring character that one of his only defining traits is that he has big metal hands, and that's it. I find every time I've read anything with Ferris in it, I am bored to tears. Could not care any less about Ferris. But I don't hate him, which is why he's not an F tier. And it's interesting too because the Iron Hands, one of the first 40K books I ever read was about the Iron Hands. And I like their like mix of like the Mechanicus and stuff like that, because the Mechanicus is one of my factions that I find very interesting. I like their advancement of technology, even if they don't call it that. And like the whole, oh yes, this is I totally just found them like a pile of scrap. I think actually Pancreas No Work had a good video about like Mechanicus, and he nailed a lot of things I liked about it. But anyway, yeah. But yeah, now they're actually one of my least favorite legions. And then on top of that, I just really don't like Ferris. I think the most interesting thing about Ferris is that, spoilers, he gets his head cut off by Fulgrim. That's like one of the most interesting things about him, is that he represents a true kind of fall among another legion. Let's see. We'll go for Corax. Corax is also E. And this is a little bit unfortunate. Corax does not have an aesthetic I like. I don't really care about the Raven Wing. I'm sorry, the Raven Guard, excuse me. Raven Guard, Raven Wing is a different thing. I always found the idea of stealth Space Marines a little weird. No, like, I understand that you can have stealth tanks and things, like, or like scout tanks and things like that, but there's just something about like a dude in full armor, and the armor like makes noise every time you move, etc. It seems a little weird to have as a stealth unit. Now, to be fair, if I remember correctly, I think the Raven Guard have a bunch of stuff that modifies their armor so it doesn't make as much noise and it's quieter. It's really not that big. He is a part of one of my. There's a novel that I rather like. I think it's Deliverance of Lost, where Korax is part of that novel. He's one of the main characters in that novel. But I personally find the other Primarch involved way more interesting. And I think, and I'll rate him when I get to him, but the other stealth guy, I personally find just way more interesting and I like him a lot more. Korax is not a bad character, he's just kind of boring to me. Where even as I was reading through the book, and it's like, he seems like he cares about his people, which makes him a little bit better. I could maybe see bumping him up to D. But we're, at least Lionel Johnson has an aesthetic I like and has certain things about his character that I like, despite still being kind of a nonce. Um, Korax is kind of the same category of fares of just being boring. I don't dislike him quite as much as maybe I dislike Ferris or Mortarion, but he's kind of in the same category of just like, oh yeah, that's a Primarch. I keep like kind of forgetting about him. Um, I'm going to put Angron up here into A. Angron is a Primarch that until I think Betrayer, I just found utterly boring because he's just like a one note character. Like, yeah, he's suffering because of the butcher's nails, but he just all he does is kill, 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 kill. And then in Betrayer, they managed to make him a sympathetic character that is very interesting to read about. And it's like, oh, he does have other feelings and emotions, but he's like constantly fighting against the nails. And like as he and Lorgar go on this whole little adventure thing, I just find him very interesting and very, like more relatable and actually tragic. And you can see that there's like that is actually a successful way of writing a tragic character. And what ends up happening to Angron when he becomes a demon is like, I think it's just a great story. I think he's great in that regard. He he would almost go into S tier if I didn't find almost every single other encounter with him so boring. I just Karn is a great character. Karn is a great character, and his interactions with like Argoltal and other things like that. I love Karn. Angron I love because of one book, and but it's such a good book that I put him very high up here. I think he is very good for that. I will say if I was rating him just as a demon or before that book, would be way lower. But it is like this big peak, and it's such a peak. It is such a great arc to all this stuff. I'm like, I don't see where is this really going. Also, and then it just all of a sudden goes, ah, peak, and it's great. And what happens to his legion? Oh my goodness, it's just great for some reason. I love that story. And then it goes back downhill to like, oh, yeah, he's rated pretty highly. I'm gonna read Fulgrim. Fulgrim is a Primarch that I both really dislike for what he becomes and a lot of things about him, like how arrogant he is, but also once again because of his character in a couple of novels, I really like him. He's just so theatrical. He's so over the top, and I'll kind of get into a little bit more of the appearance in which I liked him the most when I rate another Primarch. But I also like him in the Fabius Bile books. I think he's just kind of interesting, just being like, "Oh, Fabius, if you're attend to me," just like it's something that's just so flamboyant and theatrical, and I kind of love that stuff. I love the camp of him and like how like even after he gets his soul unpossessed, he just goes right back to being kind of a dick. It's just he's not someone I would really want to meet, but he's someone who's kind of fun to watch, I guess, from a distance. And he's flamboyant, and I think that's kind of fun. He's not like characters in other books where it's like they're flamboyant but they're annoying. I mean, because he's kind of annoying, but he's still fun. There's a character there that's interesting to look at, and like he Yeah, I'll get more into it when I actually here. I'll just read the other guy now. Perturabo. Perturabo, I'm not really sure. I there's things I really like about Perturabo, so I'm gonna put it. You know what? I'm gonna put him into A. I wasn't sure if I want to put him into A or B, but I actually really like certain things about Perturabo. He his Primarch book and a lot of stuff before Angel Exterminatus I wasn't big on, but Angel Exterminatus really manages to make him an interesting character to me. Like just in the connection to Fulgrim, like when we kind of see that he just wants to build, he wants some recognition for being able to do something other than destroy. And then like, and this is only a very minor spoiler for that book, but like when Fulgrim gets shot on stage, he just has these moments of just like, yet another thing I've created is only here to be a bad memory. Like, oh, there's a lot of like, it's not just angst, but it's like legitimate, just like, for the love of God, can I have someone to relate to? Can I have someone who appreciates me on any level? And yeah, he's an arrogant dickhead, but all the Primarchs are arrogant dickheads to a certain degree. Well, maybe not all of them, but like he has this character that I personally find very interesting. And then in the later books, like Enslaved to Darkness, where he's assigned to go get Angron back, you just kind of get this impression that he's just so tired and he just wants to be appreciated and he just wants to be doing almost anything else at this point. I like that. I like that, like he's not this one-dimensional archetype, which some people do say that he's like, yo, he's super one-dimensional, but like I like um him. I like him a lot. Um so I'm gonna rate his counterpart, Dorn. Dorn's gonna go into C tier. Dorn goes into C tier because there are things I like about Dorn. I like especially in the actual like Siege of Terra books, he seems like he's getting really stressed out, but he also still seems like he's kind of on top of it a little bit. And he seems like he feels like he knows what he's doing. He feels like he's a genuine person, and I really like as that like stern, stoic outer facade cracks, and you start to see like he's haggard and he's a person. I like that. I like Dorn in those categories. I will also say that Dorn gets a little bit more of a glow up. If I was specifically talking about non-canon appearances, Dorn would go way higher, like into A tier, because I love Dorn in the text-to-speech series, the Emperor's, if the Emperor had a text-to-speech device series. But as he is in like the Horse Heresy novels and stuff like that, I think he's a solid C. He's an interesting character, and I like a lot of stuff about him, but he's definitely not my favorite. And like, there's other Primarchs I would rather read more about. Um, Horus. Horus is D. Um, he's got some cool stuff going on for him, and I think he's kind of interesting in certain ways. Like I like the whole thing about him like wanting to work with the interacts instead of destroying them. But I mean, he just immediately becomes kind of a super villain, and I just find him rather boring. I think Abaddon is a much more interesting character from like the Black Legion books and stuff like that. I think Horus is one of those guys that has like a certain commanding presence and is like big scary man, very cool, I guess, but eh, eh, he just doesn't actually seem like he's that um good at what he does. It seems like there's a lot of moments where it's like, is he gonna fail? And if you didn't already know how the Horse Heresy was gonna play out, you'd be like, maybe there's actually a chance he'll fail, and then just plot armor, so he just keeps going. He's not the worst character ever, but I just find him kind of not very interesting to read about. Like in the book where it's Russ and him, Russ is certainly the much, 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 much more interesting part of that. The thing that makes Horus a little bit above like an E tier is that he does have suffering, and we do occasionally get to glimpse a little bit of that suffering. I think a theme you're going to notice here is that I like Primarchs who are a little bit more human. I don't like the our maybe not human isn't even the right word. They have more character. Like I understand if you just like the fighting stuff. So yeah, of course, if you just were talking about fighting, Horus would be higher. I don't give a shit about that because ultimately, the thing that always comes back to me is a Primarch would probably not be able to survive like an orbital bombardment. And if they could, it is strictly because of plot armor. A Primarch, like even in the book I really like, a Primarch should not be able to stop a Titan from stepping on somebody, as in with their bare hands. That shouldn't be possible. You're getting a little bit too silly for me. Once you start doing shit like that, it's like, oh, well, I don't care anymore. Kind of like how Superman is not necessarily a terrible character, and I've occasionally seen them make efforts to make Superman a more interesting character, but he's kind of boring just because of how powerful he really is. Horus is in kind of that category. We're just like, yeah. I don't know. I have no real love for Horus. I don't hate the man either. Just he's just kind of, you know. Um, Gilman. Gilman is going to go into B tier, and the thing about Gilman is, once again, depending on the book, I would rate him differently. For instance, when I talk about my favorite Trader Primarch, which I think I might just do next, because the way part of the reason Gilman isn't a little bit higher is because of this. Gilman goes from being a supremely arrogant dickhead, a just kind of mess of a character who in some novels is very cool with his legion, and you kind of get the impression there's more to his character, and then in others he's just a dickhead. And part of the reason he's actually rated higher, though, is because once he comes back with the Dark Imperium thing, I like the just kind of like seeing how terrible the Imperium is, looking at it and just going, "This is a nightmare. This is like the almost the exact opposite of what we wanted, etc." But still deciding to move forward and trying to lead the Imperium, despite it being the nightmare it is. I will say though, the thing that makes this kind of a dumb thing is that Gilman, pretty much anyone with a brain should have been able to look at the Imperium that they were fighting alongside, like actually look at it and go, oh, the Imperium of the 41st millennium is just it's the obvious way things are going to go. Like, there were already planets where people did literally nothing but slave and, build and work these terrible lives. And, this is also one of the things that's kind of bad about 40K. Even the characters you like, if they're loyalists, support a horrible totalitarian regime. And if they're traitors, then they're supporting literal demons and Satan. Like, you kind of have to ignore certain parts of that stuff to really be able to enjoy these individual characters. At least is the way I feel. And I'm willing to ignore certain parts of it. But yeah, I think his later developments are much more interesting. I think he's a much better character. I really wish that the Imperium and the Eldar could have actually formed a lasting alliance. Instead, they basically trashed it because people, it seems, were screaming about it. Unfortunate. Now, I'm going to rate my favorite Trader Primarch, Lorgar. Now, the thing that's funny about this is I looked at a lot of the other tier lists that are available on here and other places. Nobody puts Lorgar S tier. Nobody. Almost everybody puts him like way down there. I like Lorgar. He was my favorite Primarch for a while. He's not. Don't think I would limit him to my very favorite now. He is still among my favorites though. I like that he just wanted the truth. I like that he fought for a truth that he believed in. And people would say, well, he's delusional. It's like, that only makes sense if you assume that he knew everything about the Emperor's intentions, which he obviously didn't, because the Emperor never told him, as far as I can tell. And he also gets the right end of the deal. Like, the reason he turns traitor, like, one of the biggest reasons he turns traitor, and one of the worst times I can think of Gilman being in anything, is when the Ultramarines go to Colchis and they destroy Monarchia. and they do all this, and then Lorgar is freaking out. He's angry. He's like hitting things. He's like he wants to like kill Malgador. He wants to kill Gilliman, and then Gilliman just goes, "Are you done?" It's like, okay, now wait a minute. Stop, 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 stop. A genocide was just barely avoided. A man was going to kill. This is another reason that even if you like any of these loyalists, they're still cunts. Gilman was willing, I almost 100% guarantee you, was willing to just murder countless civilians to teach Lorgar a lesson. A lesson that, well, Emperor, why didn't you stop and, talk to Lorgar and make sure he didn't worship you, or at the very least kept it on the down low or something, instead of giving him allegiance, rushing him out. Which is, by the way, why ultimately one of the worst characters in all of the Horus Heresy is the Emperor. He is just one of the worst, dumbest characters. Anyway, Lorgar ends up going out into the warp. He finds out what demons really are. He finds out about the Pantheon, the powers, all this other stuff. And he just embraces it because the only other thing he had before that was just ripped away from him. It was ripped away from him by the thing that he idolized. And basically, up until Slaves of Darkness, I rather liked his character. I like how he develops and how he becomes more confident, and how, like, in Aurelian, you can see that, you know what, knowing the truth and just knowing that what he can fight for empowers him so much, and that he's no longer worried about it. And he obviously cares about his legion. He cares about the people under him, the civilians on his homeworld. He cares about these people, and he doesn't want to be a general. He doesn't. He wants to be a diplomat, if anything. He doesn't want to be a general. I love that character. I love Lorgar. Lorgar is one of my favorites. I don't really necessarily like the kind of turn he had during Slaves of Darkness. I don't like that he was just like, oh, now we're gonna try and kill Horus so that we can take over. It's like, I mean, I get it. I get his motivation, but ultimately, I just do not think um that Lorgar, it wasn't justified in some of his actions. Now, don't get me wrong, and that's why I said some of his actions. The whole worshiping demons thing doesn't really seem like it's great, but at the same time, if that's like the only truth that there is to embrace, well, what are you supposed to do? Oh yeah, everything's gonna be fine until you die, and then you're gonna get tortured and eaten by demons. Yeah, we'll just ignore that. Like, how do you ignore that? Uh, but no, I really like Lorgar. Lorgar is one of my favorites. Um, yeah, and I'll just go ahead and rate the other Trader Primarch. Alfarius is going to be in B because I like a lot of things about Alfarius. I think he does stealth and stuff like that in a much more interesting way than Korax does it. I like the whole concept of them working for the Cabal secretly. I like the idea that the only reason they wanted to help Horus is because they think that the end goal is going to end up being, unfortunately, the less destructive of the two. That's why I like Alvarius. I like the design. I like the Hydra stuff. I like all the scales and things like that. I like that. Honestly, not much more to say. I just rather like Alvarius. Okay. Vulcan? Okay. There's a brief pause there. Don't mind me. Um, Vulcan is one of my favorites because he's nice to his legion. He seems like he's a genuinely nice guy that cares about the people of the Imperium. He goes through hell and back, has several very cool moments where he beats the living crap out of Kurz, where he beats the living crap out of Magnus, etc. And he seems to understand, at least on some level, that even though the Imperium isn't the greatest, it's a better option than other options they're given. That's part of the reason I really like Vulcan out of everybody. I just think he's neat. Sanguinius is S tier. I think he's just a great guy, and every time I encountered him in the novels, he seemed like he was a legitimately good person and seemed like he was troubled, but he managed to still, you know, like put up a strong front and wanted to like help people. For me personally, it's hard not to like Sanguinius. He is my second favorite loyalist Primarch. And at this point, if you look down there, you can tell who my favorite is, and we'll get into him in a second. But I really like Sanguinius. Not super big on his Legion, although it does seem to have some of the best characters. And I really like the whole idea of like this Legion being of like murderers and like gangers and stuff like that. And like everyone looks down on them, and then he decides to come to them and reshape them into something better. And I kind of like the idea that it seems like the biggest reason he ends up siding with the Imperium is just so that, you know, his own people can be left alone, and that he can, you know, he's like kind of looking at the savagery of the galaxy and being like, well, what other option do I really have? And I think if you ever pay attention to like I think it's Eternity Gate in the Siege of Terra series, he very clearly doesn't actually trust the Emperor. At least I get the impression that he doesn't trust the Emperor, and that this is just like a compromise, basically. And you know, like all of his inspiring speeches and everything, and I know he's just written to be the best. One of my favorites. And then for my very favorite, the Khan. The Khan is my very, very favorite Primarch out of all of them. I really like the Khan. Um, I like that he was undecided at first because he kind of realized how totalitarian and evil the Imperium was. But at the same time, he looked at Horus and saw that that guy's literally worshiping demons. It doesn't seem like it's a great idea to join that side. I just think it's kind of funny. Um, he's very cool. I just really like him. I really like his aesthetic. I really like the whole idea that he's interested in freedom. He understands the spirituality. I like the Storm Seers. I like his Legion. I like a lot of things in his Legion, not all of them, but I feel like the being based on Mongolians thing is kind of weird. And honestly, I've heard several voice actors attempt to do like a accent from Chigoris, and holy crap, some of those audiobooks, man, like the Asian accents get like, or and you can tell they're trying to do an Asian accent, but it just comes off as just kind of fucking racist. I don't think that's their intention, but like, dear lord. Um, but yeah, I really like the Khan. The Khan is my favorites. I like that ultimately the only reason he decides to side with the Imperium is because the other option is actually worse. And he is at least self-aware enough to point out that um the Imperium is a totalitarian nightmare, but you know, in the unfortunate reality of 40K and 30K, whatever, that's just kind of what you get. This is also another reason I don't really like. At least I want to push back a little bit on 40K, is that there's a lot of really cool stuff in 40K. I do not like how much they prop up this totalitarian government as being like the best option. They keep saying things like, "Oh, well, no, you know, it's satire." I don't really. I think the early on stuff is way more easily identified as satire. I think the more modern stuff is they keep making the Imperium and the people within it very heroic, despite their um very bad tendencies. But I'm gonna probably make a separate video just about that. These are my Primarchs. This is my Primarch rating. I do notice that if, well, let's see here, because there's a total of 9 Primarchs above C tier, and one, two, three, four. 4 of them are traitors and 5 of them are loyalists. I would probably ultimately have to side with the loyalists for no other reason than like, if I had to decide between one or the other, just like, well, I don't want to worship literal demons. I don't know what to tell you about that. But yeah, that's just how I feel. Let me know if you want in the comments. Let me know what you think about this list. I'm sure plenty of people if this ever gets wider views, probably won't, but that's fine. Would probably have some things to say about Lorgar being rated so highly, but he's just one of my favorite characters. Perturabo as well, I know is not a popular choice, but I really like him in Angel Exterminatus and some of the later books. Um, and one of the last things I'll say is that a lot of these guys, I don't think their characters is set in stone as some people act like they are. I think the problem with getting this into any fictional series is eventually you're just going to get to the point where it's like it kind of depends on who's writing who at what time, Like the Emperor has moments where he's at least somewhat mysterious and seems like he might have some wisdom, but then there's a lot of other moments where it's just like because of what has to happen in the Horus Heresy, he looks like an idiot. He looks like a massive idiot. He looks like someone who, despite being like what, I think he's like 40,000 years old by the time the 30K comes around, something like that. He's learned like nothing about human behavior, like literally nothing. Is really weird to me. I I don't know. He's just if there was a tier below F, the Emperor would probably go in it for me, which kind of sucks because like once again, I'll get into that in another video. Anyway, so this is my Primarch tier list. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you disagree, agree, whatever. And I hope you all have a great day. And if it's not having a great day, then I hope it gets greater. That's always a weird phrase that I say at the end of every video. So now it's just the thing I say. But yeah, seriously, I hope you have a great day. Bye bye.